Before the measles virus trial between Dr. Stefan Lenka and German medical Dr. David Bartens, there is a remarkable case about a presumed virus that practically nobody knows about. Let's make a journey to Japan back then in the 1950s, when a mysterious disease made its appearance in the country. The symptoms were a combination of diarrhea, internal bleeding and various signs of nerve degeneration. By 1959, the disease had increased in incidence to epidemic proportions, and over the next 5 years there occurred 7 major regional outbreaks in a number of populated districts. Many outbreaks were centered around hospitals, with the annual peak occurring in late summer. The illness appeared to be contagious. All investigations focused on identifying the virus responsible. By 1964, the epidemic had worsened and new symptoms, including blindness, were occurring. Some victims developed green hairy tongue. Their tongues sprouted what looked like tiny green hairs. Some of the afflicted developed green urine. At the 61st General Meeting of the Japanese Society of Internal Medicine in May of 1964, the disease was given a formal name. Sub-acute Myelo-Optic Neuropathy S.M.O.N. Myelo from the Greek word referring to the spinal cord, optic referring to vision, and neuropathy indicating a disease of the nerves. In 1964, the Olympic Games were to be held in Japan, and the Japanese government, now very concerned, launched a formal commission under the leadership of a medical doctor, Professor Magajiro Mikawa of Kyoto University, to investigate the epidemic. The commission was formally addressed to the task of identifying the virus responsible for S.M.O.N. As the search for the virus continued fruitlessly, it was drawn to the Commission's attention that all the S.M.O.N. patients had been medically treated for diarrhea, about half taking the drug enterovioform, and the other half taking a drug called Erniform. Suspicion naturally arose that these drugs could be contributing to the S.M.O.N. problem, but it was argued that 2 different drugs could not cause the same disease. And besides, the conviction that S.M.O.N. was caused by a virus was too firmly entrenched. The epidemic continued to progress, and in 1967 an alarming new outbreak flared up in Okayama province. Dozens of elderly women, and some men, were hospitalized, and the numbers were increasing. In 1969, the Japanese Ministry of Health and Welfare reformed the S.M.O.N. Research Commission, with 10 times the funding provided previously, to step up the efforts to discover the virus threatening the entire country. Ignoring the evidence that perhaps S.M.O.N. was not infectious at all, the search was extended to include bacteria as possible suspects. The intensified effort achieved nothing. Eventually, the head virologist of the commission, Professor Ryosaku Kono, while still holding on to the virus theory, nevertheless decided all possibilities should be investigated, and appointed epidemiologist Dr. Itsuzo Shigematsu to conduct a nationwide survey of all possible risk factors. Though most of the research still focused on finding the virus, other scientists had been looking elsewhere. 1. A pharmacologist, Dr. Hirobun Beppu, had in 1969 independently noted the evidence previously rejected by the Commission, that S.M.O.N. victims had received treatment for diarrhea with a number of drugs. Then, in late 1970, 3 years after the drug theory was dismissed, a pharmacologist made a forehead-slapping discovery. The different drugs turned out not to be different at all. They were all made of a substance called cleoconol, but marketed under different brand names and freely available. The green hairy tongue and green urine, it turned out, had been caused by the breakdown of cleoconol in the patient's systems. In the same 1970, virus hunters Dr. Yuka Shijinoue et al. Published a paper entitled Virus Isolated from Patients of Sub-acute Myelo-Optic Neuropathy, S.M.O.N., where they claimed to have isolated a virus from the stools and spinal fluids of S.M.O.N. victims. They used the method introduced by Nobel laureate John Franklin Anders in 1954, in which they interpreted the cytopathic effect as the existence and the action of the virus. They also provided photographs of the pathogenic effect. 1 year later, they published another paper in Lancet entitled Pathogenicity of Virus Associated with Sub-acute Myelo-Optic Neuropathy, where they found the presumed virus that was priorly isolated from humans to cause similar symptoms in mice that were inoculated at birth. But what happened then is more than remarkable. The disease was not caused by a virus. On the 3rd August 1978, the Tokyo District Court ruled, the cause of S.M.O.N. is cleoconol. This was indisputably shown in a myriad of studies. One of them, Sub-acute Myelo-Optic Neuropathy, cleoconol intoxication in humans and animals, states that it remains a tragic event that some 10,000 individuals in Japan developed a unique neurologic disease, Sub-acute Myelo-Optic Neuropathy, S.M.O.N. Neuropathologic studies on S.M.O.N. patients and experimental reproduction of the disease in animals which had been administered cleoconol helped resolve the etiology of this disease. S.M.O.N. research in Japan may be worth reviewing for determining the etiology and preventing similar neurotoxic diseases in the future. What do you make of that? A virus is claimed to be the causative agent, and this is proven by isolation and reproduction of pathogenic behavior. This is in line with standard medical procedure, and every single virus that presumably exists and causes harm has been scientifically proven using the very same methods. Okay, Dr. Inoue and his colleagues did not isolate the virus. What they did was the exact opposite of isolation. They took samples which is assumed to contain a virus from SMON victims, then dumped the samples into the cell cultures. Numerous chemicals are added to cell cultures. That doesn't sound like isolation at all. So, in their second paper, they didn't actually demonstrate that a virus caused SMON. They had only shown that their unpurified mixtures got mice sick when injected into the brains. The brittle and artificial method, i.e. injecting toxins directly into the brain of a living animal, bears absolutely no relationship whatsoever to the normal transmission route of an alleged viral infection. The photographs they provided were the photos of damaged cells with typical particles or other cellular material. In Dr. Stefan Lanka's words, it must be said that these photos are an attempt of fraud committed by researchers and medical scientists involved, as far as they assert that these structure are viruses, or even isolated viruses. During the measles trial between Dr. Stefan Lanka and Dr. David Bardens, 2 independent laboratories carried out control tests as part of the measles virus processes. The results demonstrated that the conditions that Enders established in 1954, starvation and poisoning of cells, led to the cytopathic effect, which is death of the cells without the presence of alleged infectious material. CPE is a consequence of the action of toxic antibiotics and starvation of cells, not the action of the virus. CPE or cytopathic effect, the central dogma of virology, is debunked. Years later, at a 1979 conference, Risaka Kono asked, why had research on the etiology of SMON not hit upon cleoquinol until 1970? The question has 2 answers, both pointed out by Kono himself. There were at least 2 occasions when physicians suspected that cleoquinol might have something to do with SMON. I know of a certain professor rebuking one of his staff physicians for connecting cleoquinol with SMON. In 1967, the study group of the National Hospitals on SMON reported as follows: Enterovioform, cleoquinol's brand name, Misafilin, Emiform, home producer of cleoquinol, chloromycetin and ilosin were often prescribed to SMON patients, but no link was found between Enterovioform and SMON. This report referred to Enterovioform in particular, so that cleoquinol must have been suspected by someone in this study group. Dr. Tsugane, who was responsible for the survey, said that the survey was not thorough enough to unearth cleoquinol as a causative agent. One of the reasons could have been that cleoquinol had been used as a drug for the intestinal disorders of SMON, and it was hard to believe that cleoquinol was toxic, rather than a remedy. Another, more fundamental, reason for overlooking cleoquinol lay in the prevailing attitude of the virologists. As expressed by Kono, we were still within grasp of the ghosts of Pasteur and Koch. Today most scientists and laymen outside Japan have never heard of the virus SMON controversy, even in the face of the lawsuit against the distributors of cleoquinol, television documentaries in Germany and England on cleoquinol, and 2 conferences during the 1970s on iatrogenic, medically caused, disease. The story that SMON research had ignored the evidence of a toxic cause for 15 years, and had sacrificed thousands of human lives to a flawed virus hypothesis, is too embarrassing to the virus-hunting establishment to record. The methodology used in virology, i.e. cell culturing used to prove causality, is fraudulent and very basically anti-scientific. Virology is junk science and a cult that has now brainwashed the entire world.